If you raise your hand, somebody will get you a microphone so that everybody can hear the questions that you're asking and be able to respond.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm Sandra Walker. This is my colleague, Ms. Laura Clark. We bring you greetings from Pawnee Camp Community College and the Chancellor's College Success Coach Initiative. So if you're here for a conversation on the implications of poverty on our teaching and learning, you're in the right place. Paradigm shifts. The work that we have done has been supported by the College Achievement Alliance. One suggestion that the College Achievement Alliance has made is that we in higher ed need to do a better job of supporting under-resourced students. And I do believe that we are positioned to do so. So what's happening in America to provide this opportunity? If we look at the opportunity to serve versus a burden, what can we do? And what is it actually happening to better position us to do our jobs well? Well, there's a perfect storm brewing in America. There's a whole lot of things going on that impact our work within higher ed. We have low literacy rates. We have poverty across America. We have an aging population, including some of our own faculty that are retiring. Our immigration systems, we're looking at students that are tapped to enroll in your English as a second learning class. We're also looking at globalization of business, where borders are torn down, and now we're doing business transactionally and internationally without the thought of time or place. So what does this mean for us? What does all of this mean for us? In this country, we've always had a heart. We've always had a heart for our citizenry, and we've looked at a moral obligation to serve under-resourced students. Well, we've moved from that. The time has passed. We now have to look at this dilemma as an economic imperative. The Achievement Alliance. What's being suggested from our College Achievement Alliance is an integrated approach to serving under-resourced students, and that means on and off campus stakeholders levying those resources to support this particular group of individuals. So we're talking about cohesiveness. We're talking about a shared language or lexicon when we serve individuals, shared constructs, those hidden rules, causes of poverty, and resources. And we're looking at a shared pool of analytical ways and data analytics to assess our programming in this area. This session, so we're going to have some touch points here, and as you all know, Rome was not built in a day. And so we're not going to solve all the problems of the world associated with poverty and our student populations, but we are going to do a few things here. We're going to touch on the causes of poverty. We're going to look at external resources and internal resources. Also, we're going to delve into those hidden rules of class for your folks living in poverty, the middle class, and higher income brackets. We're also going to look at language and language registers and the stories behind students' experiences and how those experiences and stories impact their educational journeys. We're also going to look at the paradigm shifts that are required in higher education so we can improve those retention rates. We're also going to delve into some of the work that Ms. Clark and I have accomplished with the investigations into economic class. This work here, this curriculum supports our teaching in our classrooms with our HLT 195 course, building resources, and so this has been significant impact on the work that we're sharing with you today. What do we mean by poverty? We hear this word quite a bit, right? We hear media reports about poverty and poverty increasing in our communities and across the United States. So what do we really mean about poverty? Okay, this is Ruby Payne's definition of poverty. The work that we've been doing around poverty at Pawnee Camp Community College is framed by Ruby Payne's work. And what does Ruby say? She says, poverty is the extent to which an individual does without resources. Okay? So there's some suggestion here that even if folks are in your middle class or upper class, it could very well be that they have some issues of poverty or impoverished in some ways, and we'll kind of look at that a little bit later. So essentially what we're saying here, to get out of poverty, we must build resources. Students need to build resources. The resources, these are the 11 resources that students typically have concerns about. From your financial to your language, to spiritual, and that the spiritual resource here gains a lot of attention because oftentimes students that live in poverty will tell you, I may be strapped with finances, but I got fill in the bank, so I am filled with resources. I am not as under resources as you might want to believe because I have the spirit, and that's an interesting concept to share. Resources, the financial. Again, our students, they're most concerned with the financial resources. And what does that mean? Not having enough money to secure goods and services is pretty simplistic in that way. When we think about resources and we look to help our students to link to resources, what we have to remember is that the more resources that an individual has, the more opportunity that we have to retain them. Okay, so we put it in perspective in terms of the work that we accomplish. And that's why it's a really good idea to link students to resources. So who's most at risk for poverty in our country, given concerns about resources? We're talking about underage youth, okay, still living at home with their parents and really depending on parental support and family support. Immigrants. There are a lot of female head of households in our countries, disabled individuals, and minorities, okay? This is a very interesting graphic here because a lot of times our students will tell you, I'm not living in poverty, okay? But they're making $19,000 or less money, and 41% of our population do so. So they say, you know what? I may live in subsidized housing, okay? I may have a Medicaid card, EBT card, and the likes, but I'm not living in poverty. So their reality about poverty is deeply concerning here when we have 41% of our population. When we look at the middle class, there's a difference. We're looking at those folks that researchers say are earning between $45,000 and $90,000. Okay? Consistently, the research shows that this is the pay range for those individuals who consider themselves as living in poverty. Excuse me, in the middle class. Middle model of poverty. What I'll ask you all to do at this time, just take about a minute or so and imagine that, let's say, one of your students, and you probably had some experience with this, you follow them around for about a year, okay? And they were a student from generational poverty, where 2 or more generations in their family were considered as generational poverty. What do you observe? What are some of the things and some of the behaviors that students living in poverty exhibit? So take about 30 to 60 seconds to draw a big circle. And inside that circle, you're just going to brainstorm and put word after word and say, hey, this is what I've seen with students living in generational poverty. These are some examples that I do think transcend organizations. So let's get a hint here. Maybe absenteeism from class. So let's get the ball rolling there. Okay? 30 to 60 seconds. About 10 seconds left. Okay, let's take a look at your mental model for poverty and the mental model of poverty created by an organization, a group of individuals in Central Ohio. Are there some similarities between your mental model of poverty and what the folks in Ohio created? To some extent, but what we must remember, based on geographics, this mental model could change because we're talking about resources available to an individual and a community. So that's something that we want to keep in mind. Let's say our sister schools, we're located in Southeast Virginia, we have sister schools in Southwest. Our mental model may look different. Okay. These are some of the things around our mental model. Okay. Tyranny of the moment. Always in a state of problem solving. The arithmetic does not work. That means budgets cannot be stretched to cover all responsibilities. Problem solving, their concerns with problem solving and the reality of situations. Unstable environments with under-resourced students and living in the concrete, living in that moment. Relationships, as you see, are the center, okay, of the under-resourced student being here, depending on family having needs related to housing and jobs and money, etc. Tyranny of the moment. This is a phrase that's used continually in the work that Ms. Clark and I are accomplishing. Essentially what this adds up to be is, and I think my colleague Hyla Clark expressed it best, a student cannot learn if he or she is hungry. This is what this slide is all about. I think I can get some agreement in that sense, right? If a student is concerned about whether there's enough food in the refrigerator, they can't very well focus on the assignment at hand that's maybe due the next day. So this is what the tyranny of the moment means here. Mental model, the summary here. There's a certain amount of instability that comes with living in poverty. Again, the arithmetic does not match. The tyranny of the moment takes over, and that becomes most important for students in meeting those survival skills. Oftentimes, students that live in poverty, they depend on relationships because they're doing a whole lot of bartering, okay? The student that needs a ride to work from their grandmother, okay? The grandmother's helping give them a ride to work. Also, that student may be supporting some of the needs of the grandparent, and in some cases may need to miss school. And we don't oftentimes understand that folks living in poverty that are under-resourced are bartering services continually to meet their needs. And sometimes that means that what we want from them is far outweighed by what they need. Generational poverty. And we look at here, the takeaway from this particular slide is it takes 3 or more generations for an immigrant student or immigrant family to actually reach the level where one of them graduates from college, and that's very significant. When we talk about intergenerational knowledge, this is something that is a deficit for students that are under-resourced because they don't have the resources and the connections that folks that earn higher money do. The skills that are developed sometimes cost money. That knowledge that's gained sometimes is based on a connection that somebody in an upper level of our scheme of making money has connections, and the student living in poverty does not. So it does make a difference whether or not that knowledge can be passed on. You can't pass on what you don't have, and you can't pass on what you haven't learned. Key point, economic class is a continuous line. This is very important here because oftentimes in our society, we will have events that happen where someone living in your middle class will find themselves actually living in poverty. We had a situation like this to happen near Pauldy Camp service region, in our service region, where the local paper mill closed. And there were sometimes 3 and 4 generations of family members that were out of work because of the paper mill closing. So we had people that went from that $45,000 to $90,000 pay range where you see middle class, and they went to poverty and living in poverty, and things changed for them. And I must say, witnessing this up close and personal, there was a huge psychological impact because they were now forced to learn the language of the folks living in poverty because they have been living in middle class now for 3 and 4 generations. Poverty comes in all races. The fact of the matter is, quite frankly, folks, poverty is not a black or white thing. Poverty, it is not. It is not grounded in race. It transcends race, actually, and continents. The student living in small town America could live in poverty as well as a student living over in Europe. We see poverty. I lived there 4 years, and I can back it up and guarantee you there's poverty in Europe as well as in the United States. So we're talking transcending race. Let's move past that kind of dialogue and understand that race does not matter when it comes to poverty. Generational poverty and situational poverty. And sometimes we find situations where individuals move back and forth between generational and situational poverty. To be specific here, when we're talking about situational poverty, we're talking about situations that cause someone, okay, to move into poverty. Death of a spouse, loss of a job, I talked about international paper, or some sort of illness, okay, that removes the opportunity to earn a living. Okay, our next activity here, what I'd like for you all to do at this time is, what are some of your thoughts on what causes poverty? Okay, what are some of your thoughts for about 60 seconds or so, 30 to 60 seconds, if you would just jot down some ideas about what are the causes of poverty. Okay, about 10 seconds left here, if you will. Okay, so now that you've had an opportunity to brainstorm and list some causes of poverty, let's take a look at what the research says about poverty. And I will say there are 4 major areas that researchers tend to focus on here. And we're talking about the individual level. That is the behavior and characteristics of folks that are underserved and what potentially situates them to remain in poverty. Community conditions. Okay, we're talking about human and social capital in this arena. Exploitation. Exploitation, to specify here, we're talking about those payday lenders, okay? Under-resourced individuals are more susceptible to the, pay here, drive now situations, payday lenders where they have multiple payday loans. And also, we've seen in recent times that the area of sexual exploitation and human trafficking is being brought into the discussion on exploitation of under-resourced students. So that's something that we definitely need to be paying attention to on our campuses, that new information, the political and economic structures of our society. And we're talking about at the level where decisions are made, where historically marginalized voices are not invited to the table to weigh in on decisions that impact their lives. So we have these 4 areas, and quite frankly, this conversation is quite polarized. You have that group of folks that say, it's their problem, it's their fault, it's the individual fault that they're living in poverty. They could do something about it. Then you have a group over here saying, it's our lawmakers, they're making laws, they're not considering, the real life situation of individuals living in poverty. So maybe it's their fault that the policies don't support moving from one social class to another. So that gives us something to think about. The fact of the matter is that all sides of the aisle may have some credence here. So maybe these are 4 major causes of poverty and not one stands alone. Maybe they work in contingent with one another. So it's something to think about, right? What causes poverty, okay? So when we look at our list here, we've talked about the individual responsibility, we've talked about community resources, human exploitation, and the political structures that may contribute to poverty. So what we're going to do now rather quickly is identify which area of research is your primary focus, okay? Which area of research is your primary focus? For example, as a college success coach, I tend to focus my research on behaviors and characteristics of individuals. Not to say I believe that's the primary cause of poverty, but in our role as coaches, we're looking to effectuate positive change on behaviors that will garner more individual type outcomes that are positive. So what are your thoughts? What are your research areas? If you have research, if you have an interest of an area, which area would that be? 10 to 15 more seconds. Okay, all right. Well, it's been a pleasure being Ms. Clark's opening act here, and I'm going to turn the rest of the presentation over to her where she's going to really hit the hard stuff. I thank you again for your time.
And here I thought I was just the closing act. I thought I was her closer. Thank you all so much. So here is the thing. When you look at all of these definitions of poverty, I'm going to have that clicker. I can't get forward. When you look at all these definitions of poverty and all of the different causes of poverty, there's some implications for us in higher education. And Dr. Walker touched on some of the significant ones, but there are some risk factors. If you have students in your classrooms that are from a poverty background and they don't have the resources that they need, you see things in your classroom. Show of hands, how many of you have ever had a student show up on the first day of school with no books? All right, so how the whole room raise their hands. How about this? How about the third week of class, you have that student that you're still reminding, you know, you need to bring a pencil? Yeah, and so then we get to midterms and you look around and you say, where's that notebook? I've been asking you every class period for 8 weeks. You still don't have a notebook. Has that ever happened? Yeah, so we see that even with just the very basic things that we assume students need to have and should have in order to be successful in education, there are some risk factors. The other thing that's interesting about individuals from poverty, research tells us that they do not necessarily go for the educational attainment that they have the capacity to achieve. They will choose their educational institutions based on other things rather than just the best education or the best fit. There was a huge study done out of Chicago that looked at high school students that were well qualified. They could have gone to the top schools, the top research institutions, and they didn't, because there were other reasons that keep them closer to home at a different kind of institution. So a lot of times we may have students in our classrooms because guess what? We're the place they land at community college a lot of times. So you may have a very, very bright, high-achieving student that could have gone anywhere, and we have the opportunity to help that student reach their potential when maybe they aren't able to do that on their own. Also, students from poverty, research tells us, are more likely to hit remediation. And we'll talk a little bit about language development in a minute and to why some of that is. But these students often are put into remedial classes. And if you're in lower school, if you're K through 12, and they say, you know what, you need a little extra help. Guess what you now have for the rest of your educational experience? An IED, right? Somebody in the audience said. So now you have been labeled, right? When perhaps it is that you just didn't have the opportunity to build the resources you have. So our students in poverty are more likely to end up in our developmental education classes, not necessarily because they don't have the skill sets that they need, but because they've never been given the opportunity to develop them. Now, another interesting thing is this whole concept of the double whammy. Now, what is that? That is if you have a student that is low income and first generational. Okay, well, let's think about that. If they're low income, what are the chances they're also first generation students? So all of these things have a bigger effect in the college experience when they have both of those characteristics. So as Dr. Walker shared, these are the resources that we need to help our students build. Research tells us that if you're lacking and don't have at least 4 of these resources, you cannot survive. So you may not have all of the money in the world that you need to get by, but you may have an auntie that feeds you or that takes care of your children so you don't have to pay for childcare. Or you may have a cousin that can help you make sure you're taken good care of physically and you're not afraid or in a difficult situation that you fear for your safety. Are you with me? Your cousin may be a nurse that can provide some free medical care for you. So you may have other resources where you're lacking money and you'll do okay, right? But then there are other students that don't have access to those additional resources. And one of the things that we hear, and I know you've heard it because I've heard it, well, I've got Bob and I've got Tommy, and they're from the same neighborhood. They live next door to each other on the same street. They went to the same school, had the same teachers. One ended up in a gang on drugs and all kinds of illicit things, in and out of jail, just can't get it together. Well, the other one, he went on to that 4-year school, and he's working on that engineering degree. You know, it must just be the first one couldn't get it together. Well, see, what you don't know is the first student didn't have anyone. The second student, however, may have had grandparents or a church or an older sibling. They had other resources that sometimes we don't count. The other thing that's really powerful about this model of poverty, if you believe the only resource that's lacking that creates poverty is money, that means you only have one solution to get out of poverty. So if I believe that all I need to do is have more money to be out of poverty, and that will help, trust me. But if that's the only resource I have to get out of poverty, then that is my only solution. Now, I don't know about you, but my pockets are not deep enough or wide enough, I work at a community college, to fix all of the poverty money-related situations. However, if you accept that this model has some potential and that helping build these other resources also helps to build a path out of poverty, suddenly we have 10 additional resources. And you know what? I bet you can look at that list and think, you know, there's some things here I might can help with. I may not be able to reach in my pocket and solve the problem in the money world, but man, maybe I can help them build their mental and cognitive resources. If you teach in a classroom, you are helping them build mental and cognitive resources, by the way. Now, before we go forward, another key point is that all of this work is based on patterns. So please don't call and say, Ms. Clark and Dr. Walker up there stereotyping, because it's just not true. No matter what patterns you talk about, there are always exceptions. So if you hear either of us in this conversation say, well, this is what people in poverty do, please correct us. What we want to say is that this is the pattern that we see, okay? So as we go forward, there will be exceptions in every scenario. We're going to talk a little bit about hidden rules. Now, before we talk about hidden rules, let's talk about what rules are. If I am playing basketball and I show up for the basketball game and I'm wearing big pads and a helmet, and I see you dribbling and I charge you and flatten you down, how's that going to work for me? Is that the way? Not good, right? Now, what happens if I show up at a football game with a big wooden stick and I walk around and start whacking the ball with that as close as I can get to? Is that going to help me play football? Now, are the rules of football wrong? No. Rules of football are meant for what? Football. What are the rules of basketball meant for? Basketball. So in order to understand how hidden rules work, you need to understand that one set of rules is not better than the other. They're just different. And part of what we need to equip our students with is understanding what the rules of the game are when they move over into our institutions. Because guess what class rules our institutions of higher education? Middle class. That's right. It's middle class. So if you're coming from poverty and you don't know those rules, you're not going to be much different sometimes than that football player showing up to play basketball. So let's talk about what some of these rules are. I have no way to get through all of them, but I'll just give you a taste so you can see what we're talking about here. Food. In poverty, food is very important because it's the difference between sustenance and being completely without anything. Okay? So sometimes there's not quite enough food, and the idea is you need to have enough to get by. So at the conclusion of a meal, the question that's often asked is, do you get enough? Now, I've had friends that have had larger families, and keeping a heavy meal on the table to keep a big family full can be a challenge. So when that question's asked, well, did you get enough? And the answer is, well, no, I'm still a little hungry. They can go get a peanut butter sandwich, or maybe they can get something out of the pantry if there's something there. In middle class, we have a very different problem. There's usually too much food. So we don't have a concern whether there's enough food because we can have what we want. We can afford to buy it. Our question is, did you like it? Should I cook this again? Did you enjoy it? These are the meal things that we ask at the conclusion of a meal. Well, in wealth, many people in this level of wealth, they have their own chefs. So of course it's good or the chef is fired. And it doesn't matter whether it's enough because they'll have opportunity to have it at any point they want. So then the question becomes, is it well presented? Did it meet the theme of the evening? Did it meet the goal that you set forward? Do you see how this conversation is different? None of these questions are wrong or bad, but the situation and environments help to inform them. Time. As a college success coach, if I had 50 cents in my pocket for every time I talked to a student about time management, I'd be in the Bahamas with my feet propped up. all right? I know all of your students manage their time perfectly, right? Okay, good. So it's not just my campus and my students. That helps me feel better. Well, here's the thing with time. There's two ways to look at time. One of them is, how long in the future do we plan? In middle class, we typically plan 2 to 4 years out. It's not uncommon in middle class for people to know where they want to go on vacation and start making plans. We have retirement accounts in middle class because at some point we're hoping to go do something else, right? But our perspective for planning and a predictable future, because it's stable in middle class, is about 2 to 4 years. Because we don't have to worry about today. We're typically stable. In fact, we have to go to yoga classes to remember that there's a present, right? Because we tend to be so future focused. In poverty, that's not the case. The tyranny of the moment that Dr. Walker shared with you, I've got a lot of mess I got to get fixed right now. I may not have power when I get home. I don't know what I'm eating. I'm getting evicted. My car is broken. If I don't get it fixed, I'm going to lose my job. Right now is the important thing. And the saddest thing to me is that in many cases, the tragedy of students coming to us from poverty is they have no future story. Everything has been wrapped up in today. They've lost the vision for the future. So that's one of the things that we can all give our students back. Talk to them, help them build those future stories. Because when the focus is only on what I have to do this moment, I can promise you that that English paper or that math assignment is not necessarily going to make it on the radar. So we need to help teach those skills. Now, I'm not making excuses saying, well, you should just say, poor thing, I know you've had a rough life, let's just work around it. No, we have to engage and teach those skills. Because the decisions we make have ramifications. And sometimes when we make those decisions and we don't have that opportunity to see that carried out, we kind of learn that it doesn't matter what I do, it's all going to go south anyway, right? So helping your students learn to plan and helping your students understand how a syllabus works. We'll talk about that in a minute. Education. In middle class, if you're from a middle class family, going to college was something that you already knew you were doing before you even knew you were going to do anything in most cases, right? It is the goal, it is what we aim for, it's what we know we're going to do. In poverty, in most cases, education is valued as important, but it's sort of abstract. I have a student that I've worked with that their family owns a small business. We're a rural area, and there's some small family businesses, family farms. And this family is very proud of this student for coming to college, very proud. But as soon as the student leaves class, they're expected to be home helping run the family business. There's no understanding of the workload that goes behind that. So a student like that needs our help to understand how they can work with those expectations. The other thing about poverty and education is a lot of times the resources that it takes, both in time and effort and money, are taking away from things that perhaps are more valued in those relationships. So we need to be respectful of the fact that sometimes what motivates us isn't what motivates others. No matter where you end up, the rules that you were raised with, the hidden rules you were raised with, are what you fall back on. If you grew up in poverty, even if you move all the way up into wealth, when the going gets tough and you get stressed, those rules of poverty are going to be where you fall, just so you know. So one of the things we can do in the classroom is help reframe issues and try not to create issues where there are none. So the issue is talking back to the teacher. Instead of just jumping on that particular behavior, not saying that it's okay, but perhaps the way we should address that is, well, how does this help you win? We're trying to work this out. Another important thing is, I can't do it. I love using this with my student athletes, the students that I've had that were high school athletes, and for whatever reason, they didn't continue with their athletics. We will talk about the role of practice. Well, when you played football at high school, did you just show up on Friday night for the game? Well, no, my coach would have never let me do that. Then why are you just showing up for your English class? If you're going to be successful, you need to put the practice in and tie it back to things that are known and understood. So sometimes reframing the issue helps students move forward. And here's the big surprise. Did you know we have hidden rules in college? We have lots of things that we expect students to know. Listen to yourself some days. Well, check your FAFSA. Do you have a SAP? That syllabus says there's a deadline. You matriculated. We have all of these words and language that we use in addition to the rules of the classroom. You're expected to be on time. You're expected to have a pen and a pencil at every class. You're expected to take notes. These are things that we assume that everyone knows, when in fact, how did you get to know that if no one tells you? One of the worst things we do is in high school, when a student has a class, they get a list at the beginning of class for school supplies. In this class, you'll need a ring binder, you'll need a pencil, you need a, right? And they come to college, and the only thing we put on our syllabus is their textbook. And I've had students look at me and say, well, I didn't know I needed a notebook and pencil because the teacher didn't say that. Now, that seems like it may be hand-holding, but if they don't know and we don't tell them, how are they going to know? So think about your syllabus. Think if there are things that you can build in that will help uncover this hidden rules of our college. Registers of language. How many of you are familiar with this concept of registers of language? Okay, just a few hands. Every language has this. This is not special to the English language. All languages have this. A frozen register is that language that is always the same. The Pledge of Allegiance, the Lord's Prayer, traditional wedding vows. They're said the same way, same time, same cadence, pretty much always by everyone. Formal register is what we use in higher education and in most middle class and upper class households. We speak in full sentences, we pause where we're supposed to, and we have complete thoughts. There are lots and lots of words in formal register. All abstract words, by the way, live in formal register. Casual register, which is here, this is a language between friends. And we all use it, and I'll show you how you use it. Does everybody have that friend or colleague that you can say, honey, do you remember the time that? And they're like, oh, yeah, I tell you, I couldn't believe it either. You haven't said anything that anybody else in the world knows what you're talking about. That is casual register, where you're talking with people, you don't have to use complete sentences because they know what you're talking about, you have shared experience and shared history. For our students, many of them, casual register is what they have. Now, is casual register wrong? Of course not. We all use it, we all need it. But much like the rules, there's a place and a time for it, and we need to encourage our students to use the formal register in our classrooms. Formal also has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, it might just be my students, but if you ever had a student that comes to your office to see you, and you're 5 minutes into the conversation going, I wonder why they're here. And we're still talking about something, right? And 5 minutes later, you're like, I really would love to know why I can help, right? Those circular conversations. Casual register tends to be circular because it helps us to engage people. It helps us to tell and be more interesting and engaging. So it's important that we work with our students on these patterns of discourse and help them understand, but also be respectful of the fact that they may not have ever had to use that in speaking. A little bit more about language. Translation. I do this in my classroom. It's lots of fun. When you hear casual register in your classroom, as I'm sure you all have, I introduce this to my students in the first class session. We have a paper. If they say something that's not what we would expect them to say that would use formal register, I'll write it up there. The teacher says, they give them an activity. Well, this just sucks. Okay, let's translate that to formal register. I think what you meant to say is, there is no longer any joy in this activity. And so if you help them start to understand how things translate, if you want a real treat, try translating your college catalog into casual register. My students have tried parts of it. It's a trick, okay? Yo, mama, what does that even mean? Well, what they tell us is it's pointless for you to accuse me of improper behavior when certain members of your own family behave exactly the same way. We also have 3 voices of language that we use. We have a parent voice, an adult voice, and a child voice. Child voice. It's just not fair. Why does it always happen to me? This is our emotion. I don't like this. I don't like you. I don't like this work. I don't like any of it. This is our emotions. Our parent voice is the one, unfortunately, that we tend to respond to that. Would you just grow up? Get over it. This is what you should be doing. Parent voice tends to be very directive and very authoritative. Now, there are times we need that, right? If we're trying to clear the building for a bomb threat and somebody's lollygagging in the hall, we need to say, get your butt out, let's go, right? But oftentimes we default to that in the classroom instead of the adult voice, which is the problem-solving voice. The adult voice is what helps us move the situation forward. Parent and child go round in circles. If you're a parent or you have been a child, which I suppose we all have, you understand how that argument goes around in a circle and doesn't move the conversation forward. Teaching our students by demonstrating it and helping them use the adult voice, well, what ways can we resolve this situation? I just don't like anything. It's just, okay, so what can we do to make the situation better? I understand you don't want to write that English paper, but you're 8 weeks into the semester. What are you going to do? Well, I just want to quit. Well, what's that going to accomplish for you? And help them get involved in the problem-solving process. The other thing is in casual register, body language is huge. Because if I don't have words, I have my body. Because if I come in to see you today and I'm upset, I may say, you know, I'm mad. Now, if I come back tomorrow and I'm even madder, I may not have other words like frustrated or angry or annoyed. So now I'm going to have to say, I am just mad. Now, if I come back day 3 and I'm really mad, I might say, I am really, really, really mad, right? Because I don't have the attributes of all of that vocabulary that formal register will give me. The catch is our students read our body language so quickly, and we lose them sometimes because we mess this up. They are experts because they have to be. If you want to fix your body language, it's very simple. Does anybody want to know how to fix your body language right now? I can fix it for you. Here it is. Fix your intent. And when the student walks in your office and you've got 47 things on your desk and you know that they're going to tell you that long circular story that you just don't have time for, and you're trying to get this report in because you know it's due by 5 o'clock and it's 4:30, instead of going, oh my gosh, what do I have to listen to now? Decide you're going to hear that student. And if you make the decision that for the next 5 minutes I am going to listen to this student, your body language will reflect that every time. No significant learning occurs without significant relationship. I'm going to just leave that where it is. So in order to build relationships of mutual respect, we must articulate, and this is important because we're not asking to lower the standard for our students. In fact, we're asking you to raise the standard. You must articulate clear and high expectations, insist that the students will reach them even if they don't believe they can, and provide the appropriate support to help them get there. That's our calling. All right, so I'm going to move on quickly because I'm running out of time. So the question of motivation often comes up when you're talking about students from under-resourced. How many of you have ever said or heard, that student's just not motivated? If I could just motivate that student, it'd be all okay. Okay. Nobody else has had any problems with motivating students? All your students come to class ready to work, motivated? Okay. It's just me, so I'm preaching to the choir. Everybody is motivated for something. Even our under-resourced students who are having rough stuff go on in the world, they are motivated by something. The thing is, though, it's probably not what's motivating us. So we say things like, well, I need you to complete this class so that you can go get a job and you can get a career and you can make money and you can support your family or you can, buy the car. Whatever that is that we tend to talk to our students about. That student may simply just want a safe place for their grandmother to live or be able to take care of their little brother or little sister. So if we're going to motivate our students, it's not going to be us motivating them. It's going to be us uncovering what motivates them. And sometimes it just takes a question. Why are you here? And they'll tell you, surprisingly. It may take a minute, but they will tell you. And if you listen to the undercurrent of what it brings them there, and you help them understand that and feed that back to them, you will move them forward in that motivation. Because only when it's about them, and this was part, if you were in the plenary session, I said students will do optional. This is the only way to get students to do optional. You have to be on their agenda, helping them meet their goals. And when they see that, they will then give you a voice towards change. And that's where the power comes in. Because change is hard, and we have to acknowledge that. That's all I have. But I thank you, and I want to give you time to ask some questions. Do we have a couple of minutes for questions? Do we have questions? Do I have minutes for questions from the back, gentlemen? Okay. So what questions do you have? I'll bring the microphone to you. We couldn't possibly have answered all of your questions about poverty and teaching and learning. Is there a question?
I don't have a question, but I just want to make a comment. I think that it was an excellent presentation, and I commend both of you. So it's great.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you so much. How much time do we have back there, gentlemen? We're done. Okay. Look at that. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for coming.